Just one ship. Why they expected a fleet? Why did humans send just one ship? The hall was silent when I walked in. Not the polite silence of waiting, not the respectful silence of ceremony. It was the kind of silence that happens when 17 civilizations look at something and cannot quite believe what they are seeing. I felt every set of eyes in that chamber land on me the moment the doors opened. I kept walking. My name is Yara Solis. I am the commanding officer of the UES. Unconditional, and on that morning I was the only human being in a room that had been designed to watch my species kneel. The Varath conclave was beautiful in the way that power tends to make things beautiful. The chamber hung inside a neutral orbital station positioned above a star that was slowly dying. A deliberate choice by whoever had designed this venue, I always thought, a reminder that everything ends. The walls curved inward from all sides, and the seating tiers rose like a coliseum filled with delegates from species whose names I had spent 6 months memorizing. The Varath coalition held the center seats. 7 species united under one banner, representing the largest coordinated military force the known galaxy had ever assembled against a single civilization. Against us, against Earth. They had destroyed 3 of our fleets. In 18 months, let that settle in for a moment. 3 entire fleets, ships and crew, and years of construction, and the dreams of the people who built them, all gone. The Varath had done it cleanly, efficiently, and without what I would call excessive cruelty, which in galactic politics apparently passes for restraint. After the 3rd loss, Earth's unified council sent a communique to the conclave accepting the invitation to attend surrender negotiations. 17 civilizations had come to watch humanity sign away its colonization rights, pay reparations, and reduce its military presence to a fraction of what it had been. They had been expecting a fleet for the ceremony, an honor guard at minimum, show of remaining pride from a species that was by all measurements beaten. We sent 1 ship. I walked to the center of the chamber floor where a single podium had been placed facing the curved wall of delegates. I was wearing my dress uniform, dark blue with silver trim along the collar. I had no weapon on my hip. I was carrying a small case, the kind you might use for documents or personal items, made of dark metal with a simple latch. I set it on the edge of the podium and looked up at the room. Kavas was sitting in the central Varath seat, elevated above the others on his coalition's tier. He was large by any standard. The Varath are built like the idea of strength made physical, with deep gray plating across their shoulders and a face that communicates very little to human eyes. But I had studied him. I had read every intelligence file we had on him, every recorded speech, every account from neutral parties who had negotiated with him. I knew exactly what kind of mind sat inside that composed exterior. He looked at me for a long moment, then he looked at the doors behind me as if expecting more people to follow. Then he looked at the empty space beside me. Then he looked back at me. Commander Solis, he said in Galactic standard that carried the particular weight of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. Is the rest of your delegation still aboard your vessel? No, I said, I am the delegation. The murmuring started then, not from Kavos, who was too disciplined for murmuring but from the galleries, from the neutral species in the upper tiers, from the smaller coalition members who had expected theater and were getting something they did not have a script for. I heard at least 3 translation devices working at speed. I heard a clicking sound from the SSF delegation that I would later be told was the equivalent of startled laughter. Kavos was quiet for a moment, then he said with the careful control of someone who was genuinely trying to be generous, "We had anticipated a larger attendance given the significance of today's proceedings." "I appreciate that," I said. "We felt one representative was appropriate for a surrender, for a conversation," I said. The murmuring doubled. Someone in the upper gallery made a sharp sound that cut through the noise. Kavos raised one hand and the chamber went quiet again. With the speed of long practice, he leaned forward slightly. "Commander, Earth's Council accepted our invitation to negotiate terms of cessation. The terms have been prepared and reviewed by all member species of this conclave. We had anticipated a formal ceremony signing a close to this conflict." "Then let's have that," I said. "I have something for the table." I opened the case. Inside, sitting in a simple foam bracket, was a crystal data core about the size of my closed fist. It caught the chamber light and threw small fractured patterns across the podium surface. I lifted it, walked to the treaty table that had been positioned at the center of the chamber floor, and set it down. Then I walked back to the podium and stood with my hands at my sides. Kavas looked at the data core. He looked at me. Every diplomat in that room was looking at the small, quiet object on the table, as if it might do something unexpected. "That is what we brought," I said. "Everything humanity has to say today is on that core." "One data core," Kavas said. "One data core," I confirmed. He was quiet for another long moment. When he spoke again, there was something new in his voice, not anger, not contempt, something closer to the tone a person uses when they suspect they are about to be surprised and they are not sure yet whether they welcome it. "Why," he said carefully, "did humanity send just one ship?" I looked at him. I let the question sit in the air of that enormous chamber in front of 17 civilizations above a dying star. "Because," I said, "one ship was all this required." Nobody spoke. The silence this time was different from the one I had walked into. That first silence had been the silence of people looking at something small and failing to understand it. This silence was the silence of people beginning to wonder if the small thing was not what they thought it was. Kavas nodded once slowly. He gestured to one of his aides, a young Varath officer, who moved to the treaty table and carefully lifted the data core. "We will review the contents," Kavas said. "Take your time," I said. And I waited. What does a person think about while waiting for the most powerful military coalition in the known galaxy to open a box? I will tell you what I thought about. I thought about a man named Owen Carr. Owen was a propulsion engineer. He was 43 years old, had a son named Luke who wanted to grow up to be a pilot, and had the specific kind of laugh that makes everyone around him laugh too, the kind you cannot manufacture or fake, the kind that just comes out of a person because they find the world genuinely funny. He had been aboard the Second Fleet. We lost. He did not come home. I think about Owen when I need to. Remember why the thing we built had to be exactly what it was, not bigger, not louder, not built from grief or from rage, which would have made it brittle. Built from the cold and very human understanding that the only way to honor the people we lost was to make sure we never lost anyone that way again. Let me tell you about the 22 months between the end of the Third Fleet and the morning I walked into the Verath conclave. After the third loss, Earth Defense Councils met in closed session. No press, no public feed, no official communique beyond the one accepting the Verath surrender invitation. To the outside galaxy, humanity went quiet. Quiet the way a deep ocean goes quiet on the surface while something is happening below. The session produced a single directive. Not more ships of the type we had already built, not expanded versions of the same approach that had already been measured and found wanting 3 times. Something different. Something that required the kind of patience that is genuinely uncomfortable to maintain when you are angry, which we were, and when people are asking why you are not doing something visible, which they were. Project Long Patience, that was the name. I did not name it, I inherited it when I was given command of the unconditional 14 months into the program, and I will admit that the first time I heard it, I thought it was a strange name for a defense initiative. Then I understood what we were building, and I thought it was the only name that could possibly fit. The unconditional was constructed inside Jupiter's upper atmosphere. That detail is not incidental. The gas giant's own electromagnetic signature masked every energy reading, every construction emission, every test fire of the new systems we were installing. To any scanner looking inward from the outer edge of the solar system, Jupiter was Jupiter, enormous and indifferent, and giving away nothing, which was exactly what we needed. The hull was designed by a woman named Clara Vance, who had been building diplomatic courier vessels for 11 years before Long Patience, and who was recruited specifically because she knew how to make a ship look like something it was not. The unconditional from the outside reads as a midweight courier. It has the profile of a vessel that carries documents and personnel, not one that carries the capability to end an afternoon badly for anyone who makes the wrong decision. Clara used to say that the best dressed person in any room is the one nobody worries about. She built the unconditional on that principle. Inside the hull, the story was different. I want to be careful here because the details are still classified in some specifics, but the shape of it is this. In 9 months, human engineers who had never seen Verath weapon systems from the inside produced a working, reverse-engineered model. That model was then improved 3 times. Before the program ended, the final version was not a copy of Verath technology, it was a response to it. Built not to match it, but to specifically and precisely answer it. The way a good argument answers the exact points of the argument it is countering. Our shields no longer operated on the same harmonic frequency range the Verath weapons were calibrated to penetrate. Our propulsion could sustain combat speed maneuvering for durations that Verath tactical models had assessed as physically impossible for a ship of our tonnage. The scanning and signal processing arrays were the work of an engineer named Declan Price, who had been told 3 times during the program that what he was trying to build could not be done, and had responded each time by doing it. Anyway, Declan's arrays could passively collect detailed tactical data on any vessel within a certain radius simply by existing in the same region of space without emitting a single active scan pulse, completely invisible to any detection system that was looking for scanning behavior because there was no scanning behavior to detect, just presence, just listening. 41 other ships had been built alongside the unconditional, not identical but related, distributed across the edges of known space in the months before the conclave date, positioned in configurations that required no communication between them to execute a coordinated response. Each captain had sealed orders. Each ship was dark, no active systems that could be detected, no type beam communications that could be intercepted, just quiet vessels sitting in the black at ranges that put them beyond sensor coverage of the conclave station. 41 ships waiting on a single coded signal from me. I had not sent that signal, I was not planning to send that signal. But they were there. There's a concept in chess, and chess is of the oldest games humanity has ever played, older than space travel, older than everything that brought us to this moment. The concept is called zugzwang. It describes a position where the most powerful move available to you is to not move at all, where your position is so strong that the very fact of your stillness puts pressure on the opponent because they know what stillness from you means, even if they do not know the exact shape of your capability. We were in zugzwang. We had been in zugzwang for 4 months before the conclave date, and while Cavus's aide carried that data core toward the Verath technical station at the side of the chamber, while 17 civilizations waited for the contents of a box the size of a human fist, I stood at the podium and thought about Owen Carr and about Clara Vance and about Declan Price and about 41 dark ships sitting in patient silence at the edges of sensor range. The Verath technician interfaced the core with their reading system. The display above the treaty table lit up. I watched Cavus's face. Here is what the data core contained. It did not contain surrender terms. It did not contain a formal statement of capitulation or a list of reparations or a proposal for territorial cession. What it contained was a live tactical overlay of every Verath vessel currently docked at or in orbit of the conclave station. Their positions, their shield harmonics, their crew manifests, the maintenance cycles of their weapon systems, projected crew response times in the event of a general alert. 47 individual vulnerability assessments, one for each ship, precise enough to be useful and detailed enough to be humbling, and at the bottom of the overlay timestamped was a single notation, data collected passively during standard approach to this station, collection completed before docking, no active scan conducted. Cavus looked at the display for a very long time. Then he looked at me. I had been watching him carefully enough to see the exact moment when the shape of the situation changed in his mind. It was not anger, it was not fear, it was the look of a very intelligent commander who has just discovered that the map he had been using was wrong, not in its details but in its entire orientation. The look of someone recalculating fast. From the beginning, around him, the other delegates were reacting differently. The SSEV Representative made the clicking sound. Again, several of the neutral species were leaning toward each other in low, urgent conversation. One of the smaller coalition members had stood up without appearing to realize it, and an aide was gently pulling him back to a seat. I let the display run. I let them look. I let the room breathe the information in at its own pace. Then Declan's final edition loaded. 41 points of light appeared on the display, spread across the space around the station, each one time-stamped and labeled, each one carrying a ship designation, a readiness status, and a distance reading. That placed every vessel just beyond the range the Verath scanners had been searching. The chamber went the kind of quiet that does not feel like silence, it feels like pressure. Kavas had not moved. His posture was the same as it had been at the start of the ceremony. Whatever he was feeling, he was not showing it. I respected that. Genuinely, he was a commander of the First Order. What he said next told me everything I needed to know about why this conversation was going to end the way it was going to end. He said quietly, to no one in particular, and to all of us at once, how long have they had this? It was not a question, it was a man thinking aloud. I answered it anyway. 4 months, I said. We have been ready for 4 months. The SREF delegate made a sound that the translation system rendered as they waited, and then again softer, and with what sounded like genuine wonder they waited. I looked at the room, at 17 civilizations sitting in the curved tiers of a chamber designed for a surrender ceremony, at the display that was still quietly presenting its data. Above the treaty table, at the 41 points of light that were not moving, not threatening, simply being exactly where they were. We sent one ship, I said, because we came here to talk. Everything else you see on that display is not a threat. It is context. Nobody spoke for a very long time. I want to be accurate about what happened in the room because the stories that got told later did not always get it right. It was not a moment of triumph. I was not standing at that podium feeling the heat of victory or the satisfaction of a long plan finally executed. What I was feeling was something much quieter and more careful than that. I was feeling the specific attention of someone who knows that the next 60 seconds will matter more than anything else in the room, and who is determined not to waste them. Kavas had not spoken since his question. The chamber was still holding that precious silence, the kind that has weight to it, where every person present knows something has shifted, but no one yet knows what it has shifted into. The display above the treaty table was still running, Declan's tactical data cycling through its readouts, patient and precise, and entirely indifferent to the atmosphere it had created. I spoke first because waiting for someone else to define the moment is the one luxury you cannot afford when you are the only human in the room. What you are looking at, I said, keeping my voice level and clear, is not a declaration, it is an explanation. I stepped away from the podium, closer to the treaty table, closer to the display. I wanted the room to see me standing next to it rather than behind a piece of furniture. Something about that distance matters when you are trying to be understood. For 22 months, I continued, Earth was quiet. We accepted that silence was being read as defeat, and we accepted that consequence. We needed the time. More than we needed the appearance. What you are seeing now is what we did with that time. Kavas finally moved. It was subtle. He straightened in his seat by a fraction, and his eyes moved from the display to me with the deliberate focus of someone who has decided to pay a specific kind of attention. I took that as permission to continue. 18 months ago, the Varath Coalition determined that humanity's colonization expansion posed a threat to regional stability. We disagree with that assessment. We have always disagreed with it, but we understand why it was made, and we understand that disagreement without capability is not a position, it is a complaint. I paused. We chose not to complain. A delegate from one of the neutral species, the Davari, if I remember correctly, small and quick and almost impossible to read, leaned forward in their seat. I had been told they never spoke during formal proceedings. They spoke now. You had the capability to respond 4 months ago. You chose not to. We chose to come here instead, I said. Why? It was the same question Kavas had asked, in different words, and I had been ready for it for a long time. Because the goal was never to demonstrate that we could cause harm, I said. Any civilization with sufficient desperation and engineering time can cause harm. That is not a distinction. What we wanted to demonstrate was something harder. I looked at the display, at the 41 quiet points of light that we could have acted, and chose instead to talk. The Esrath delegate made the clicking sound again, sustained and layered this time, and the translation system worked for a moment before producing something approximate. The restraint is the message. Yes, I said, exactly that. Kavas spoke then, and when he did, it was not with the public voice he had been using for the ceremony. It was quieter, more direct, the voice of a commander speaking to another commander, with the ceremony put aside. Commander Solis, you are asking us to accept that this display is not a weapon. I'm not asking anything yet, I said. I am explaining what is true. He considered that the difference matters to you very much. He was quiet for a moment. Around us, the chamber had gone from pressured silence to something else, something with more air in it. People were still tense, but the particular fear that comes from not understanding what is happening was beginning to ease as understanding replaced it. I could see delegates conferring with their aides. I could see the Davari representative writing something on a small surface. I could see 3 of the smaller coalition members looking not at me, but at Kavas, reading him the way subordinates read a commander when they need direction. He gave them none because he was thinking. I let him think. Then he said, if we had proceeded with the original ceremony, if we had opened that data core expecting surrender terms, and found this instead, how would you have responded to our response? It was the most honest question anyone had asked me all day. It deserved an honest answer. That would have depended entirely on your response. I said, we came here with every possible outcome prepared for. We were hoping for this one. Hoping, he repeated. We are still human, I said. We plan, and we prepare, and we build things that take 22 months in a gas giant's atmosphere, but we still hope. Something happened to his face then, not a smile. The Varath do not smile the way we do, and I would not have expected it. But something eased. Something that had been held in careful alignment shifted. By a small degree, the way the air in a room shifts when a window is opened. He looked at the display one more time. At the 41 points of light at the ship. Manifests at the vulnerability. Assessments that no species should have been able to compile on Verath vessels. Through passive observation alone. You built something extraordinary, he said. We had extraordinary motivation, I said. The people you lost. Among other things, I paused, we also lost the assumption that being right is the same as being safe. We lost the luxury of building ships without understanding the specific answer to the specific problem in front of us. We lost 22 months of the life of every person who worked on this project, working in conditions that were not comfortable. Because comfort was not available, I looked at him steadily. We do not need you to honor that. We are not asking for it. But we would like you to understand that none of this came from nowhere. Kavas nodded. It was a slow, deliberate nod, the kind that means something different from agreement. It means acknowledgement, recognition, the thing you give someone when you have fully heard them. The display, he said, the actual terms, they are also on the core. They are, I said. May I ask you to summarize them? 3 items, I said. Resumption of colonization rights in the disputed sectors we were developing at the time of the conflict, a non-aggression pact between the Verath Coalition and the Unified Earth Council with a 10-year review clause and a mutual defense article. The chamber came alive again at that last point, multiple voices from multiple tiers cutting across each other. In several languages, the Davari representative stopped writing. Even a few of Kavas's own aides exchanged looks. A mutual defense article, Kavas said, carefully over the noise. Yes. You are asking to protect us. We are asking to be in a formal alliance, I said. Protection is mutual. That is the point of the word. Commander, he stopped. He started again. You arrived here as the subject of a surrender ceremony. You have presented evidence that you are not in a position that requires surrender, and your terms include an offer to act in defense of the civilization that destroyed 3 of your fleets. Yes, I said. Why? I had been waiting for this one, too. Longer than the others. Because we have been in the position the Verath Coalition put us in, I said. We have been the smaller civilization. The species that didn't fit the existing order, the people who expanded somewhere that other people thought they had a right to decide about. We have been afraid of things we did not understand. And we have had things taken from us by forces that were larger than us, and we survived it. I looked at him. We do not want to become that force for someone else, not for you. Not for anyone. The mutual defense article is not charity. It is the only kind of relationship we are interested in having with our neighbors. The chamber was quiet again, but it was a different quiet from all the other silences I had walked through that morning. This one had something open in it, something that was not yet anything specific but could become something if handled well. The Esreth delegate made a sound, and this time the translation came through immediately. They want neighbors. We want neighbors, I confirmed. Kavas looked at me for a long moment. Then, for the first time since I had walked into that chamber, he looked away, not in dismissal, but in the particular way a person looks away when they are thinking something they need to be alone with for a moment. even in a crowded room. Then he looked back. I will need to consult with the coalition before any formal response. He said, "Of course. This will take time." "We have plenty of it," I said. "We are very good at waiting." For the first time, something shifted in the set of his face in a direction that might in the right light have been the Verath equivalent of what I meant. He stood and the chamber followed his example, and I watched 17 civilizations stand up in a room that had been built for a surrender ceremony while the data core sat on the treaty table between us, and 41 dark ships waited in patient silence at the edges of known sensor range, and above us all the dying star continued its long, unhurried work. The private anteroom off the grand chamber held 2 chairs, a low table, and a window that looked directly at the star below. I had been shown to it by a Verath aide, who said nothing on the walk over, which I did not take personally. The Verath are not a species that fills silences with words they do not mean. I had come to find that quality restful. I had been sitting there for about 10 minutes looking at the star when the door opened and Kavos came in. He did not bring an aide. He closed the door behind him. He sat in the chair across from me, and for a moment we both looked at the window, at the long, slow curve of light from the dying star spreading across the room. "That star has another 400 years, he said, give or take. "I didn't know you studied stellar science," I said. "I studied everything there was to study about this station before I agreed to host the conclave here," he said. "Including the star." He paused. It seemed appropriate for what this meeting was intended to be, an ending. I looked at the star. "What does it mean in your culture, a dying star?" "Completion," he said, "not failure. Thing that spent its energy doing exactly what it was made to do and left behind the material for the next thing." He paused. "It is considered honorable." I thought about that for a moment. We have a similar concept. We do not usually apply it to stars, but the idea is the same. He nodded. Then he said, "I want to ask you something directly, and I would like a direct answer." "All right. You had the capability to act against us 4 months ago," he said. "I have reviewed the tactical overlay during that recess. I understand it fully. I am a military officer. I know what those numbers mean." He looked at me. "Why did you not use it?" It was the same question as before, but asked differently now in private without the ceremony around it. I understood the difference. Before he had needed to understand the political reality. Now he wanted to understand the human one. I took a moment before answering, not because I did not know the answer, but because I wanted to give it the weight it deserved. "We have a word," I said. "It is not easy to translate. It sits somewhere between restraint and mercy, but those are not quite right because they both imply that something was withheld out of generosity toward the other person." I paused. "This is different. It is the understanding that force used when it does not need to be used as force wasted, that the measure of what you are capable of is not found in what you do. When you have the advantage, it is found in what you choose not to do." Kavas was quiet for a moment. "You believe this?" "I was raised on it," I said. "Every human officer is. We have a long history of doing the wrong thing, same as every other species. We have made choices we are not proud of, but the thread that has run through our best moments across All of our history is that the people we remember are not the ones who had power and used it. They are the ones who had power and chose carefully. 3 fleets, he said. 3 fleets, I agreed. That was real. Loss, real people. We are not built to not feel that. I met his eyes, but grief that turns only outward becomes something that destroys more than it heals. We did not want to destroy. We wanted to solve the problem. The problem being us. The problem being the misunderstanding between us. I said, there is a difference. A problem with a person can be solved, a person cannot. He looked at me for a long time. You are a difficult civilization to understand, Commander. We find ourselves difficult to understand, I said. We have been at it for a very long time, and we are still working on it. Something in his posture shifted then. Not relaxed. Kavos did not appear to fully relax, and I suspected he never did, which I understood completely, but something eased by a few degrees. The way a long-held tension eases when it becomes clear that the thing you were braced for is not coming. The terms, he said, the mutual defense article, I want to understand it before I take it to the coalition. What would you like to know? If we agree, he said, and a third party acts against the coalition, a species we are in conflict with, not a misunderstanding but a real and justified conflict, you would be bound to respond. Yes, I said, even if you disagreed with our position. In that conflict, I paused, we would respond because you were attacked. That is the agreement. What we said to you about the conflict separately might be very direct and very uncomfortable. We would not pretend to agree with a position we found wrong, but we would honor the alliance. He studied me. That is an unusual distinction. We find it essential, I said, an alliance that only functions when everyone agrees on everything is not an alliance. It is a performance. We are offering you something real. Real things have edges. He was quiet for a long time. The light from the star shifted slightly as the station completed a small portion of its rotation. The room moved through a band of warmer color, amber and then gold, and then back to the steady neutral brightness it had been. Our historians, Kavas said finally, will have a great deal to say about today. So will ours, I said. I wonder how they will describe you. I thought about it. Honestly, I hope they do not describe me much at all. I hope what they describe is the decision. Not who made it, but that it was made. That it was possible. He looked at me with something that I had not expected to see in his face. Something that translated across the distance between our species clearly. Enough that no translation device was needed. You are genuinely not interested in the recognition. I am interested in what comes after, I said. The recognition is just noise around the edges. He stood. He was taller than the room seemed built for, and the light caught the deep gray of his shoulder plating in a way that made him look for a moment less like an adversary and more like exactly what he was, a commander who had fought for his people and was trying to figure out if there was something better available on the other side of it. He extended his hand. It is not a Verath gesture. I know for a fact that he had researched it specifically because it appeared in none of the recorded Verath diplomatic interactions I had studied. Before the conclave, he had found it somewhere and chosen to use it. I took his hand. I will bring the terms to the coalition, he said. I will recommend Acceptance. Thank you, I said. He nodded. He moved to the door, then he stopped with his back to me and said, without turning around, the ship. You're unconditional, the name. Yes. It means that your commitment to the outcome does not depend on conditions being favorable. I looked at the star through the window. That is one reading of it, I said. He left, the door closed. I sat in the anteroom for a while longer, watching the light from a dying star come through a clean window, and thought about Owen. Care, and thought about what comes after, and thought that if we had managed to get this right, it would be worth every month of every quiet and difficult and completely invisible thing we had done to get here. Outside in the black, 41 ships waited. Patient, ready, silent. I did not send the signal. I never had to. A year after the conclave, on a bright Wednesday morning in Geneva, I stood in front of 112 new graduates of the Unified Earth Diplomatic Corps and tried to figure out the right place to start. The room was a good room. High ceilings, tall windows, the kind of space that has been used for important things long enough that the importance feels built into the walls. The graduates were young, most of them, though not all. Some had come to the Corps from military backgrounds, some from science and research, some from fields that had nothing to do with space at all until circumstances or curiosity or whatever combination of factors, shapes of life had brought them here. They were looking at me the way people look at someone they expect to tell them something useful. I'd been thinking about what to say for 2 weeks. I had written 3 different versions and deleted all of them. The problem with writing a speech about the conclave is that the story is already known, and the parts that people know are the dramatic parts, the data core on the treaty table, the tactical overlay loading in front of 17 civilizations, the 41 ships that appeared as points of light on the screen. Those parts are real and they are true, but they are not the parts that matter most, and I did not want to stand in front of 112 people who were about to go out and do the actual work of keeping the things we had built intact and give them the exciting version of a story that is actually at its core about something quiet. So I started with the letter. Most of them did not know about the letter, the data core that I placed on the treaty table at the Verruth Conclave held 3 categories of content. The first was Declan's tactical overlay, the passive scan data on the Verruth fleet, the vulnerability assessments, the 41 ship positions. The second was the actual treaty terms, the colonization rights, the non-aggression pact, the mutual defense article. The third was on the very last page of the Corps' document file, following the treaty terms after everything else. It was a letter, written in 43 languages, every language spoken by every species represented at the conclave, including 3 languages from neutral species that had no particular stake in the outcome but had been invited to observe. It was written by a woman named Louise Hartley, who was the president of the Unified Earth Council and who had been, before entering politics, a primary school teacher in a small town in the English countryside, which I mention because it is relevant to the letter. The letter did not discuss military capability. It did not reference the tactical overlay. It said nothing about ships or shields or the 22 months of work inside Jupiter's atmosphere. It was 1 page long, It said simply that humanity remembered what it was like to be the smaller civilization, the species that did not fit the existing arrangement, the people whose expansion was read as threat by those who had more power than them. It said that humanity had experienced fear of the unknown and had not always responded to that fear with its best qualities. It said that the people of Earth had no desire to become to anyone in the galaxy the kind of force that generated that fear in others. And it said that the offer on the treaty table was not made from strength alone, but from the specific and hard one, understanding that strength without intention is not a foundation. It is just a fact about the current moment that will change. The letter ended with a sentence that Louise told me later she had rewritten 17 times before she felt it was right. It said, "We do not send this letter because we are certain you will agree. We send it because we believe that the clearest thing we can say about who we are is not what we built but why we chose not to use it." I read the letter aloud to the graduates. I read it slowly the way it was meant to be read. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then I told them the part they already knew. The ceremony, the chamber, the data core, the display, Kavaz's face when the tactical overlay loaded. I told it without embellishment because it did not need any. I told them about the private meeting in the anteroom, about the question of why we waited, about the handshake at the door. I told them about Owen Carr, who they had not heard of, and about Clara Vance and Declan Price, who some of them had, because Clara had given a public talk at the academy and Declan had become slightly famous in engineering circles for reasons he found deeply inconvenient. And then I told them the part that happened after, which the official histories cover but tend to treat as a footnote. 3 of the 7 Verth species began formal cultural exchange programs with Earth within 6 months of the conclave. Not diplomatic programs, cultural ones. Educational exchanges, joint research projects. A Verth scholar named Athkin, who specialized in what roughly translates as applied ethics, spent 8 months at the University of Edinburgh and reportedly found the weather both baffling and compelling. 2 of the remaining coalition species were reserved, watching from a distance, which was their right and which we respected completely. The 7th species, the Durath, who had been the most vocal within the coalition about pursuing the original conflict to more complete terms, requested a separate conversation with Earth's Council, not to dispute the treaty but to ask a specific question that their delegation had been sitting with since the conclave. They wanted to know how we had maintained operational discipline over 41 crews for 4 months of complete communication silence in a situation where those crews knew what they were carrying and knew what was happening at the conclave without a single unauthorized action. It was a good question. I had been asked a version of it several times. The answer is not a tactical one. The answer is that each of those captains had been given, along with their sealed operational orders, a copy of the same letter that was on the data core. Louise's letter, the one that ended with the sentence about why we chose not to use what we had built. Each of them had read it, and each of them had understood that their stillness, their patience, their willingness to sit in the dark and wait was not a passive act. It was the most active thing they could do. It was the point. None of them broke silence, not one. I told the graduates that story, and then I stopped talking for a moment to let it settle. One of them, a young man named Callum, sitting in the fourth row, who had come to the core from a background in linguistics, raised his hand. Did you ever doubt it, he asked, in the ante-room when Cavis was reviewing the terms? Did you ever think it might not work? It was an honest question. It deserved an honest answer. Yes, I said multiple times. There are about 7 distinct moments in that day that I can identify, looking back, where the outcome was genuinely uncertain, where a different choice by anyone in that room could have moved things in a direction I did not want. I paused. Doubt is not a sign that your plan is wrong. It is a sign that you understand the stakes clearly enough to take them seriously. What did you do with it? He asked. The doubt. I kept moving, I said. Doubt is information. You listen to it, you check your reasoning against it, and then if your reasoning holds, you keep moving. He nodded. He wrote something down. I looked at the room, at 112 people who were about to go out into a galaxy that was wider and stranger and more complicated than it had been 18 months ago, partly because of what happened at the conclave and partly because of what came after, and mostly because the galaxy is always wider and stranger and more complicated than whatever map you had for it last week. There was one more thing I wanted to say. I had saved it for the end, not for dramatic effect, but because it needed to come after everything else, after the letter and the story and the question and the answer. The fleet was ready, I said. I want you to understand that clearly. Every ship was ready. Every crew was briefed. The weapon systems were calibrated. Declan's assessment gave us a precise picture of what we were dealing with. We had the capability to alter the situation in our favor by force in a matter of hours, and we had had that capability for 4 months. I looked at the room. We sent one ship. We put a letter at the end of a data core. We sat in an anteroom and had an honest conversation. I stopped. Remember why? I said. The room was quiet. Outside the tall windows, Geneva was going about its morning in the particular, unhurried way of a city that has been through enough to stop being impressed by urgency. The light was coming in at a low angle, the kind of light that makes even ordinary things look like they have weight and meaning. After the ceremony, I walked to the hangar where the unconditional was docked for maintenance. It looked the same as it always had, a midweight courier, unassuming, designed to be overlooked. Clara Vance's best work. I walked around the hull once, which I had started doing before every voyage as a kind of habit I did not fully understand, but had decided not to examine too closely. There was something new on the hull. I almost missed it because it was at the rear near the engine housing, applied in a paint that matched the hull color almost exactly and only stood out if we're looking at the right angle with the right light. It was a word, one word in Verath script. I had a translation device in my pocket. I had been carrying one for months because my Verath was still coming along slowly, and I preferred accurate translation to confident error. I pointed it at the word. The device thought for a moment. Then it rendered the translation as neighbor, close companion, one who is near and stays near, the one whose Presence is chosen, not assigned. The long one, the one who remains. I stood there for a while looking at it. A maintenance officer named Pete, who had been with the Unconditional since before long, patience came around the corner, wiping his hands on a cloth, and almost walked into me. "Oh," he said, "sorry, Commander, didn't see you there." He looked at the word on the hall. Cavaz's people sent someone to put that there last week. Asked permission first. Thought that was a nice touch. "It is," I said. Pete looked at it a moment longer. "What does it say?" "Neighbor," I said, "more or less." He nodded slowly in the way people nod when a simple word turns out to contain more than they expected. Longer word. "The neighbor," he said. "It is the longest word in their language," I said. Pete looked at the word for another moment, then he nodded once as if that settled something, and went back to work. I stood there until the light shifted and the word disappeared back into the hall color, and then I stood there a little longer anyway, thinking about Owen Care and about Louise Hartley's letter and about 41 crews sitting in patient silence, and about the specific and stubborn human conviction that the thing you choose not to do can be just as powerful as the thing you do. One ship was all we had ever needed. It always had been.